On behalf of the Edina Public Schools Health and Wellness Committee, welcome to our second annual Student Wellness Challenge. The Health and Wellness Committee is led by Margot Buck, who's the Director of Business Services, and by Randy Smazel, who's the Director of Teaching and Learning. The committee consists of principals, parent representatives, nutritional staff, and high school student representatives. My name is Amy Murphy. I'm a former trauma ICU nurse, and I represent Southview on the committee as a parent. At our first committee meeting in the fall, we received a great deal of feedback from the student representatives about the stress and anxiety that they're facing in their sophomore and junior years. They're taking AP classes while playing varsity sports while trying to apply to college. They were hungry. They told us that the food provided in the cafeteria was not nearly enough. Some of them were having to buy 3 meals in order to satisfy their hunger. And they were sleep deprived. Many of them had injuries. These kids were trying to do so much, more than any of us could possibly do. And so as a committee, since this was our first meeting in the fall, that became the focus of this year of our committee, was to try and find ways to help students cope with stress and learn about what stress is, and possibly even set some limits on the number of activities that they sign up for. So based on that feedback, we brought speakers to this event that hopefully will teach us how to help our teens to identify and manage the stress in their lives. We'll learn how to teach our children to love their bodies. We'll hear about the gift of good nutrition. We will hear about how integrative treatments are used for adolescent psychiatric disorders. And we will get an introduction to mindfulness. And finally, we will explore how success in education needs to be approached holistically, that we need to nurture our children's body, mind, and spirit. Our speakers are only presenting for about 15 minutes, and we will have about a 5-minute question and answer period after. I realize it's a very short time for them to speak, and I guarantee that you will want to listen to them for much longer than 15 minutes. But we wanted to get as much information to you as possible and introduce you to the incredible resources that we have in our area. Our first speaker is the author of Table in the Darkness, A Healing Journey Through an Eating Disorder. Her blog, Helping Women Develop a Hunger for Life. In her blog, she is not afraid to talk about the things that no one likes to talk about, the feelings of jealousy, fear, shame, but she also talks about how these feelings can be replaced with love, gratitude, and grace. She is an Edina mom and works at Park Nicholet's Melrose Center, helping people that are struggling with eating disorders. And she is going to speak to us about how to help your child love their bodies. Please welcome Lee Blum.
Good morning. All right, I love it how I had prepared for an hour, and then I prepared for 20 minutes, and now Amy's like 15 minutes. So we'll see how fast I can do this, right? We are going to dive right in this morning, and I'd like to first start with a video. pretty powerful video. Would you guys agree? So today I'd like to talk to you about how to teach your child to love their body. Did you know that 42% of first, second, and third graders want to be thinner? 80% of 10-year-olds hate their bodies. By the time a girl is 17 years old, she's seen approximately 250,000 messages from the media telling her what she should look like, which is the thin ideal. Gaining weight is the number one fear of teenage girls over losing their parents or getting cancer. And when we think about boys, we think younger boys, they may compare their bodies, but once they get to high school, body image issues amp up with things like steroids, weightlifting, and other issues to have that perfect body. Did you know that in the United States, 20 million women and 10 million men struggle with a life-threatening eating disorder? In addition, many individuals struggle with body dissatisfaction and disordered eating, which leads eventually to a potential eating disorder. The problem that I see, because like she mentioned, I work at a hospital and have struggled with an eating disorder in my own life in my early 20s, is that nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about body image. Nobody wants to talk about eating disorders. But the reality is, as I mentioned and you saw in the statistics, that this is an epidemic. We've got a problem. But the coolest part is that we're here talking about it today, right? We're here having the dialogue. And I want you to walk out of here today having some strategies that I have seen to be true and research shows to help your child learn to love their body. The first one that I'm going to talk about is teaching emotional intelligence. What's ironic is when you, not ironic, but when you go and Google emotional intelligence, you can find lots of books on it. But when I ask people what emotional intelligence is, often they don't understand. And what I mean by emotional intelligence is if we can start teaching our children to understand their own emotions, the research shows that they will be less likely to go need drugs, alcohol, or alternative substances, or to diet or to try and change their body. So that's really good news, right? We hear all this stuff, and I'm going to talk later about our obesity crisis, but we hear all this stuff about, like, we need to talk about nutrition, we need to talk about this, and we need to talk about that. You know what we need to talk about is emotional intelligence. I know this to be true because in my own life, growing up as a little girl, I was highly emotional. I came out very energetic, very emotional, and very sensitive. And what happened in my family system was there was no room for my emotions. So when I would say, "Oh, I'm hurt," my mom would say, "No, you're not." Or when I would say, "Oh, somebody was mean to me," no, you're okay, you're fine, right? So there was no room for me to have a human emotional experience. And what I find is really ironic is we do this as adults now too. When somebody's crying, what is the first thing that we do to them? It's okay. Stop crying. Or we give them a Kleenex, or we give them a hug, instead of allowing them to have their emotions. And with our children, we can sometimes be guilty of this, of saying, "Oh, you're okay. Oh, buck up." Or, and my husband always says, "Tough little camper," right? And what we're doing then is we're not allowing them to have human emotions, or we're not allowing them to have a space for them. And when we don't have a space for our emotions, then we run to things like drugs, alcohol, food, to fill up that void of not being able to experience emotions. Something that people also don't understand is, how do eating disorders happen? Oftentimes, because I work at a hospital for eating disorders and because I've written a book about it, people will say, "Oh, it was probably the mother's fault, right? It was probably the mom's fault. That's why they have an eating disorder. I've seen the mom at the gym and she works out all the time," right? Or they will say to me, "Oh, it's the media. It's really the media's fault. And if we could just get rid of the media, then nobody would have an eating disorder." This is the easiest way that I can explain to you how eating disorders happen. Genetics gets the gun. So research is starting to show that they are identifying a gene that could potentially be the anorexic gene. right? And so that will come out, I'm guessing in the next 10 or 20 years that they probably will be able to find that gene. But there's many other eating disorders besides just anorexia. But genetically predisposed to addictive behavior. So all the patients that I work with, when I start identifying with them their family system, there is usually somebody who is an alcoholic, drugs, some sort of addiction, whether it's gambling or pornography, some sort of addiction in the family system. So that has to be present for an eating disorder to really take hold. So genetics gets the gun, environment loads the gun. You saw the statistics, right? The media messages that our kids are getting, the constant beratement of this thin ideal, this constant fear of the obesity crisis. So that only fills in, and then an overwhelming set of emotional circumstances pulls the trigger. And what I mean by that is for each person, it can be different. We've had kids as young as 9 years old come into our treatment center, and people ask, how does that happen? Well, genetically, they're predisposed to addictive behavior. Maybe somebody is bullying them at school and telling them they're fat, so they start watching what they eat, but then maybe their parents are getting a divorce at home, or maybe they're having social situations, and then that pulls the trigger for an eating disorder. So it's important to understand that as we talk about body image, not everyone's going to develop an eating disorder. 2 sisters, that's me and my sister when we were little and now grown up. She's 4 years older. We grew up in the exact same household. We grew up with a mother who never ate a full meal. She was consistently on diets. Constant talk by my father about fat people and how gross they were. So these messages that just kept bombarding us. But only one of us developed an eating disorder, me. So why is that? Because I had the genetic predisposition for addictive behavior. And so when I started dieting, my sister dieted, but when I started dieting, in a time in my life, college, that was overwhelming, it pulled that trigger for me. And it became something to numb. But remember I mentioned emotional intelligence, correct? So in my family system, there was no room for my own emotions. So I didn't feel like I had an ability to take up space in this world. I didn't feel like I had an ability to say, hey, I'm angry, or hey, I'm sad. So when I'm talking about emotional intelligence in your own children, what this looks like is you acknowledging his or her perspective and empathizing. And empathizing is not saying, I know how you feel. Because if you've got a teenager, and I have 3 boys at home, 2 of which are teenagers, they will say to you, no, you don't know how I feel, right? Even if you say, but I was a teenager, they'll just completely crush that. So not saying, I know how you feel, but saying, I can see you are fill in the blank. Or if you don't want to tell them how they're feeling, say, tell me what it is like for you. Tell me what this experience is for you. And then you're offering them room to have their own emotions, which is very healthy for these teenagers. Another one is allowing expression. So as a child growing up as a very vibrant, passionate young girl, there was no room for me to have my own expression. And I ended up majoring in theater in college, and my family was like, oh, that's so weird. Why would you do that? You're never going to make money. All these things. And so there was this constant squashing of my own expression. So allowing your child to have their own expression. Listening, and the key is listening to his or her feelings. There's a fantastic book out there, if you've, all of you probably have teenagers, which is called Mom, I'd Listen to You If You Just Shut Up. And I started reading that book, and it has changed the way I parent. Because oftentimes as parents, we think we have to fix our children, but when they're teenagers, it's time for them to start exploring. It's time for them to have their own emotions. And it's not time for you to tell them whether or not what they're feeling is right or wrong. So being able to listen to their feelings and say, oh, isn't that interesting? That's all you have to say. Isn't that interesting? Let's be curious about that. And then as they get older, you're really going to need to start teaching problem solving. So that they, remember, so emotional intelligence is so that they don't run to alternative coping skills. And then playing it out. And what I mean by playing it out is learning to play with your children. Oftentimes, I don't know about you, but growing up, my parents, it was a generation where they didn't really sit down on the floor and play with us, right? And so then I have a hard time now with my children sometimes thinking that I should go play. But research shows that if you go out and play with your kids, that also creates an environment where they can tell you what's going on in their life. So the first thing, and if you've got the handout, the first thing is teaching emotional intelligence. So if you don't listen to anything else I say today, at least go home and allow some room for your kids to have their own human emotions. The other piece that's really important is that you are allowing a space to express your own emotions. So when I work with these patients, we don't talk about drugs, alcohol, or the eating disorder. We talk about their feelings. And 100% of the time, the patients will say, feelings were never allowed in my house, or my mom never cried in front of me, or my dad was always one emotion angry. And so that's why this research shows that teaching emotional intelligence, you modeling emotional intelligence, you modeling the range of emotions will help your child. Shame, blame, disrespect, betrayal, and the withholding of affection damages the roots from which love grows. Love can only survive these injuries if they're acknowledged, healed, and rare. Brené Brown. So if you've ever read any of Brené Brown's stuff, or if you haven't heard of her, I encourage you to go and pick up some of her books on shame. The second is modeling healthy sleeping, eating, and exercise habits. Whew, that's a lot, right? And in no way do I want you to walk out of here and feel like, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing that. More than anything, I want you to come out of here and have some tools to start implementing. So modeling healthy sleeping, eating, and exercise habits. What do I mean by that? Well, first we're going to start with eating. Food is, what's in the center? Fuel. Food is one thing, fuel. When I go and put gas in my car, I don't then get in my car and go, oh, I'm such a bad person, I put unleaded in my car, right? But oftentimes, we eat McDonald's, and we have that response. Oh, I just put something bad in my body, right? And you can find plenty of stuff on the internet that tells you how bad McDonald's is. After today, I want you to stop using that word bad. Because what happens to a child and an adolescent is when they hear the word bad and you've attached it to food, when they eat that food, they feel bad. And you have now created an environment where shame can grow. Remember the roots image before? So my husband actually is in the gym, and he's teaching fitness, and he is a fitness guy and all about healthy nutrition. And we talk about this often because he's like, but Lee, the reality is McDonald's, look at the research. It's really bad for you. Yes. And are you going to go through your life never eating McDonald's? What happens when you drive to Kansas? Right? Because I'm from Kansas. I drive there all the time. There are only McDonald's, Dairy Queen, and Subway on the way. So if I think food is bad, then I'm not going to eat. Food is fuel, in moderation, in balance. So what I want you to start teaching your children is food is fuel. That's it. So not going to McDonald's and saying, well, no, we're not going to eat at McDonald's, it's bad. But saying, what is going to fuel you for today? So for example, my 14-year-old son thinks Nutella came from heaven. And that's all he constantly is eating Nutella. And we have to go on these Nutella breaks because he's so addicted to this Nutella. So instead of saying to him, honey, Nutella is bad for you, you shouldn't be eating that Nutella because that shames him, I say to him, when you go play hockey, do you think the Nutella is going to give you the energy you need to make it through a whole hour of a hockey game? Ask your body how it feels after hockey, and then tell me what you see, right, or what you feel. And oftentimes he's like, yeah, I kind of ran out of energy. And so then we talk about, well, if you got more protein and fat mixed together will help sustain you longer. So you see, I didn't put any emotions in there. I didn't say this is bad, you're bad. I just said, what's going to fuel you up, just like putting gas in the car. When we start attaching emotions to food, we have done a disservice to our children. I can't tell you how many teachers have said that to kids, said, oh, you should never eat sugar, that's bad, right? Let's say they've got the genetic piece. Let's say they've got some really rough stuff going on at home. They stop eating sugar. Then they stop eating other things. Then they stop eating other things. Next thing you know, they're not eating anything. So we want to stay away from that conversation of bad, good. And what we say at the hospital is all foods fit in moderation, right? Yes, of course you don't want to eat McDonald's every day. But It's okay to have McDonald's every once in a while. It's not going to kill you. Nobody's going to not eat McDonald's for the rest of their life. I mean, maybe you will, but do you get what I'm saying? And then the other piece is I brought up shame a couple of times, and when I ask people what the difference between guilt and shame is, they don't know. So I want to explain it to you. Guilt is, I've done something wrong. Shame is, there is something wrong with me. Guilt is, I've made a mistake. Shame says, I am a mistake. Guilt is, what I did was not good. Shame says, I'm no good. Shame is a universal feeling. We all feel it. But shame is also extremely paralyzing. And oftentimes children and adolescents don't seem to understand the difference between guilt and shame. Or your kid might be shaming themselves. Oh, I ate this. I'm a bad person. Oh, I'm not thin, I'm a bad person. And that's a real dangerous territory. So when you're because you're all going to teach emotional intelligence now when you get home, when you're working on emotional intelligence with your kids, check and see, are they feeling guilt or are they feeling shame? And if you are experiencing these types of things as well, I encourage you to do some mindfulness work on your own and figure out what's going on. And maybe you need to get some help and see somebody about that shame. What is normal eating? Oh my goodness, in our society, how do you even know what normal eating is, right? Go to Cheesecake Factory. That is not normal eating. Their plates are that big. In our society, we have no idea what portion sizes are. So if there's anything that you can do, you can go to choosemyplate.gov, and it's on the back of your sheet, and make sure you understand what portion sizes are. And oftentimes people will say to me, well, I want to eat, a bag of chips all in one sitting. And I ask this question, well, what did you have for lunch? Because you're not going to be able to eat a bag of chips in one sitting if you're getting all of your food groups in moderation and eating normally. Does that make sense? So trying to make sure you are educated and understand what you're feeding your children. And normal eating, the thing that people don't really understand about normal eating, and I would say does our society have an eating disorder? Like most people have eating disorders? No, most people have a disordered relationship with food, right? Attaching emotions to food. We use the words comfort food. We have Thanksgiving where we don't eat all day and then we binge it in the evening instead of eating consistently throughout the day. Normal eating is eating 6 times a day, making sure you're getting all of these elements here. And if you're listening to your body, it will actually tell you what it wants. Oftentimes people will tell me, my body tells me it wants Oreo cookies every meal, right? I'm like, no, it doesn't. I promise you, if you sat down and ate 6, 7 Oreo cookies, you wouldn't want them later. Because your body is going to be like, I'm kind of done with that. But if you're not eating anything throughout the day, then your body's just going to want sugar right away. Does that make sense? So your body needs everything. And if you listen to it, it will actually tell you what it needs. But if you're not feeding it throughout the day, then it gets all these confused messages, and then it just says, sure, you could just give me sugar. But we have found with our patients and in my own life that 6 meals a day, eating in moderation, consistently allowing your body to have food every 2 to 3 hours is really actually what your body needs. And you will find a more whole life because of that. How am I doing on time? Am I doing okay on time? It's time? Oh, goodness gracious, how am I going to do that? Okay, I'm almost done. Okay, are we in an obesity crisis, right? Aren't we in an obesity crisis? Absolutely we are. But did you know that the obesity rate is 9% in girls, while the rate of eating disorders is 18%? One of the unintended side effects as we continue to talk about the obesity crisis is that our children are becoming afraid. And then we're seeing a high incidence rate of growing eating disorders. We need to stop talking about the obesity crisis. Yes, it's a problem. But do you guys remember Just say no to drugs when we were in school, right? Just say no, just say no. Research shows that it never worked. They put all this money into it and it didn't work because people are not motivated by fear. So the more we continue to talk about the obesity crisis, the more we continue to say this is bad, this is good, people aren't going to make changes because we are not motivated by fear. We are motivated by other things like loving our lives, people, and relationships. Modeling healthy sleep. So if I could do anything in the next 10 years in terms of wellness for adolescents, it would be one thing. I would throw away everything I said and I would focus on one thing, and that is sleep. Because research shows that our adolescents are getting less sleep than ever before. And does anyone know why? Because Edina starts, yes, this is going to be on the TV because Edina starts so early. Yes, and because of the devices. So our children are looking at their devices before they go to bed. Their brains are stimulated, right? They aren't able to go to sleep. And did you know that while an adolescent is sleeping, they are producing a specific hormone that helps them regulate food intake? If we could get our children back to sleep, if we could get them to put away their devices an hour before bed, I promise you we would have much less rate of obesity. The third is, and I'm almost finished, is living by example. If you're seeing a lot of these things and you're like, oh goodness, I don't model healthy emotions. I don't eat in front of my kids. Or I exercise 10 hours a day. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but we do have patients that will exercise that long. Then I encourage you to get some help. Because your children model after you. And I'll move on for this. I do want to tell you one other thing, and this is very important. Moms are probably the most important influence on a daughter's body image, and dads are the most important influence on a boy's body image. And research shows it's the same sex gender that makes the most impact. So my mom growing up was consistently on diets and consistently hating her body. Do I think that contributed to my eating disorder? Absolutely. Did it cause it? No. Did it contribute? Yes. So if you're making comments about your body in front of your children, or you're making comments about other people's bodies in front of your children, I encourage you to stop it now. If you are struggling with any of these issues, then I encourage you to get help because you are modeling for your children healthy body behaviors. Every parent can teach their children to love their bodies by implementing these 3 techniques that I mentioned: teaching emotional intelligence, modeling healthy habits, which include normal eating, getting sleep, exercising in moderation, and living by example. I'm going to tell you a few things that I think also can help you. I think really redefining beauty and health in your own home, talking about balance, variety, and moderation, talking about food as fuel, not using the words good and bad. All of these things will help you to help your children so that they don't go down that road and have to come and visit our hospital. I recommended these books. They're on the back of the sheet I handed out. And I would do question and answer, but we're running out of time. But I will be at the table, and my information's on there if you have any further questions. And I thank you for listening.